everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7, and Virginia football is entering a bye week. It's been a disappointing few weeks with losses to Duke and Louisville. And to talk about where things stand, we bring Daily Progress's Greg Madia. Greg, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to do it, Jacquie.
You know, the accountability is the word that we've been seeing tossed around a lot in this program, and I felt like we needed to put ourselves accountable for our stuff when we talked about during our game previews for our decisions and during our buy or sell segment. But before we get to that, accountability has been something that Tony Elliott has been saying about the coaching staff as well as the players. He's also been saying that he wants more buy-in from these players. He's been so looking for that. When you look at this program right now, how much of that buy-in or not some players buying in, was it a surprise to you, or is it really just about a new coaching change? You know, that's the normal transition when you go from one philosophy to another.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's the line Tony Elliott's walking right now at UVA in his first season at the helm of the Hoos. He's trying to figure out who's on board, who isn't, and what it's going to take to get to the point where the locker room is fully entrenched in everything he's saying. He comes from a program at Clemson that has a certain way of doing things, and it's been super, super successful there. Of course, it didn't quite start like that. Even he's mentioned, they had that tough year in 2011. They lost that Orange Bowl to West Virginia, 70-33 game. And it took time for that culture to grow. That after that season, right, Dabo had to fire his defensive coordinator then and ultimately hired Brent Venables. And that really helped things turn in the right direction. Players understood. They had talent on that team. Players understood then what they were trying to build. And, through the years, it grew and it grew and it got better. And it, built into one is at that point right now where they're trying to understand how to win, learn how to win, not just, on a Saturday, but within a game and within the snap from one snap to another, running on the field and off the field, in practices, what it takes behind the scenes, understanding the football intelligence it takes to win games. Those are all things Tony Elliott is worried about right now and is trying to instill in his team in order to help them in the future. Of course, there's new offensive schemes, new defensive schemes that he believes in, that he wants for the program and thinks will work for Virginia long term. But there are some issues with the current group because you have a team that had some moderate success last year, right? They weren't championship good a year ago, but they were bowl eligible good. The offense was excellent and fun. And slinging the ball all over the yard. And Brennan Armstrong became one of the most accomplished passers in the country, finished second in the country for passing yards per game in 2021. So when you have to recalibrate and readjust to what your new coaches are teaching, I'm sure there's at least a little bit of question and a little bit of hesitance. But I think what's important is Elliott gets those older players. And I think he does have Armstrong, Nick Jackson, Anthony Johnson, those type of players who are fully all in on what he's teaching. And that's I think, the most critical, because if you get those top guys that some of the first-time starters and younger guys and redshirt guys look toward, maybe it can help you set the culture. If those guys remain bought in and those guys stay bought in, I think he'll be okay. I think what's happening now is you have a lot of guys who want to be in, but just don't understand exactly what he's talking about, understanding exactly what it takes to win. And he's used to seeing it at such an elite level. Clemson, the highest of the highs, where no detail is left, overlooked. I think that's the difference right now. And that's why you're not seeing the results all the way click. Before I had this job, I covered James Madison up the road in Harrisonburg. And that team was dominant at the FCS level. Heck, they're dominant right now, winning at the FBS level. But one thing there is that program knew how to win. Kurt Cignetti, the head coach there, did a great job instilling it, even after Mike Houston left and after they won an FCS championship in 2016. So to me, you just, when you're in programs like that and you see it, you know what it takes to win. And that's what Elliott is trying to do at UVA. He's trying to instill those little things behind the scenes and within a game that maybe the average fan doesn't notice, but come 3-4 years down the road, maybe it pays dividends.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been stressing a little bit on the podcast and even on our site, Wahoo's 24/7, is that this is such a different circumstance for a coaching change.
Yeah.
Generally, it's an expected coaching change because the team is not performing well or someone's retiring. And this was unexpected. So the players didn't know the coaching change was about to happen. So mentally, they weren't ready for it. Their bowl was canceled, so they couldn't even play for their head coach one more time. And a lot of these guys are very close with Bronco and some of the staff members. And then here comes a guy who's trying to change the culture and impart what he's doing in the program. So I can see why there's some hesitancy. It's just a different type of coaching change and different type of coaching position. And I think in some ways, this might be harder on a coach trying to come in, because if you're coming in a program that's in a disarray from top to bottom, it's a little easier to come in and say, listen, I'm trying to change everything. I want you to show when you've got, like you're saying, the offense that was successful last season, come in like, I'm going to change it to my system because this is building a foundation for the future of this program. It might take a while to get to where you guys were. And that's a little harder to buy in, especially with competitors that you have on a team. So it's probably, I don't want to say it was surprising because when in coaching change, you have this sort of transition, but I think everyone expected the buy-in not to be in, this point when we're hitting the bye week. I think that was probably the surprising thing to me anyways. And Greg, I'm going to have to put you on the hot seat. Like myself, I have to be on the hot seat too. Let's take a look at what we said before the season. And I think we can start with the offense here because that's probably the biggest thing. So we both bought that this offensive line was going to do enough to create a run game and to protect Brennan Armstrong. We both said they needed time though, but we both thought it was going to be okay early on in the season. And we both actually said that this offense wasn't going to put up big numbers though. We both said that was something that we were going to sell. So looking back and looking at, and I'm also going to pull up some numbers here so that people can see, did you expect so much of the growing pains? I'm going to bring up, if you're on YouTube, I'm going to bring up Pro Football Focus's numbers. And if you're a Wahoo's 24/7 subscriber, you have seen these. According to PFF, Brennan Armstrong was the second most pressured quarterback through the first few games this season. That is reason why sometimes Brennan just can't get the ball out. Were you shocked at how much pressure he's been getting or how long it's been taking for this group to kind of mesh?
I can't remember exactly when we did that podcast, but I didn't anticipate so many lineup changes through the early going, right? At the halfway mark, they've started, 7 different offensive linemen at this point. If you count Mikhail Boley and you count Ty Furnish, who began the year as starters. Since then, Jonathan Leach has entered the starting lineup. Justice Johnson has entered the starting lineup. And they've continued to rotate Johnson and Furnish at center. And all along, at least through the early part of training camp and into the first few weeks of the season, you heard, they were looking for 5 consistent offensive linemen. If you're still playing, still rotating guys, Noah Josie's played more in recent weeks. I think more in a Duke game than anything else. But if you're still rotating that many guys, I don't know how you can get that cohesion. And that's been something I didn't quite anticipate. I thought they'd settle on 5 and maybe have, 1 or 2 rotational pieces. But not guys they sub in, every other series, it seems like, with Johnson and Furnish at center. So to me, that's been really interesting. And I think one of the other things that maybe in hindsight I should have looked at then was how many odd front defenses they were going to face, right? That group had struggled against 3-down defenses and assessing where blitzes are coming from, and opposing defensive coordinators in those systems are having an absolute field day, because at Illinois, at Syracuse, and again this past weekend against Louisville, they couldn't block an odd down defensive front. And the rushing numbers tell the story too. I think I was looking at it when they're facing an odd down front defense, they're only averaging like 65 rushing yards per game. When they face an even front defense, the other 3 games they played this year, they're over like 190 rushing yards per game. That's a huge difference. So that kind of tells the story, because it shows, inexperienced offensive line, not going to be able to communicate where those blitzes are coming from so well. That's the difference to me at this point is, They haven't really found the five. They're inexperienced, so they don't know how to communicate against defenses that are going to be disruptive, going to blitz from all different angles. So that's what's tough. I think they've found some pieces, right? Anytime you start a freshman at left tackle, no matter the circumstances, and Mikhail Boley, that's a promising thing. I think John Paul Flores has been a good addition for them. Is kind of steadied with an older voice who's played some football. The transfer from Dartmouth, Logan Taylor has played every game, so I think they have something there, some pieces there, but they just haven't been able to put it together as a unit. And they haven't been able to figure out those odd front defenses.
Yeah, and I know a lot of it, their hands are tied because it's been injuries, it's been illnesses.
Yeah.
You know, Jonathan Leash is playing a cast with his hand, so it's sometimes it's just the coaches are tied up. They don't have the ability to go down the depth chart because some of them are hurt. And you talk about Mikhail Boley being a first year, having a start. Houston Curry is now in the 2 deep, another true freshman. So that's where their depth is when it comes to this offensive line. And it affects Brennan Armstrong. We could just look at some of the grades he's had this season. And ironically, although we've been talking about 2 losses against Power 5 opponents to Duke and Louisville, those are the 2 best games for Brennan Armstrong as far as passing. He's actually had the highest passing grade of 76.2. Now, nothing compared to his season grades from the last 2 years of a 90.3 in 21 and 85.2 in 2020. But it is showing improvements, little improvement. You can't blame the guy for drops when the guy gets the ball in his chest. And I think that's probably the most shocking thing for me is how many drops there has been for this sure-handed wide receiver. When we're talking about last year, that Brennan Armstrong sometimes can toss the ball knowing their wide receivers can make a play. He doesn't have that confidence. So you have a quarterback who now can't trust his protection. Sometimes he's throwing on his back foot, and I feel like his mental timing is off, is that mental clock, because even when he doesn't have pressure, sometimes I feel like he feels like he does have pressure. And then you have a position where either they're not comfortable in their routes or they're kind of bumping into each other because they're not running the correct route at that time. They're mistiming between Brendan and the wide receivers. You got drops. So there's a lot of things going on with a new offense. And actually, let's take a look here. This is the passing direction for Brennan so far this season, and it kind of explains what's going on. They've been struggling on those deep throws, something that they tried a little early on in the season, and something that Des Kitchings discussed a little bit, how they adjusted more to those short passes and those sometimes getting those jet sweeps and stuff to get more momentum. And something that we saw in Duke, I liked when they've moved the ball a little bit better, and you saw that in Louisville, just as haven't been consistent enough. And that's something where it's hard for a guy like Brennan, and when you watch this offense, you're like, well, if only this were to happen, they would have won. But then you like this has been a consistent problem, Greg, where it's like those little things aren't meshing. And at some point you're like, when are they going to stop shooting themselves in the foot? Having those penalties on offense that negates those big yardage plays, like Xavier Brown's illegal blindside blocking that took away that long pass to Keaton Thompson. And then those drops. It's hard to evaluate a team where there's so many self-inflicted wounds.
Yeah, and this past weekend, they were basically one-dimensional. They couldn't run the football against Louisville, and I think that makes things even tougher. So I guess it's a credit to Armstrong that his grade numbers were strong via Pro Football Focus because that he essentially was in drop-back quarterback pass mode the whole game. When you can't run the football, you can't have as much success off play action because nobody believes you're going to run the football well. So to me, I think that's part of the issue too. This past weekend, they've been able to run it well at other games, but you need to have it consistently if you're going to play in this offense, right? It's not like last year where it's an air raid offense and it's going to be, the ball's going to be slinging around the yard, and defenses know that, but your scheme is geared to have a pass-heavy offense. This offense that Tony Elliott and Des Kitchings have installed and implemented is supposed to be balanced. So you have to have at least the threat of the running game in order to do some of the things in the passing game that I'm sure they'd like to do. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the odd front. You got to be able to block that better. And I think Des Kitchings and Tony Elliott have mentioned their running backs have to be better. They have to be better in one-on-one situations and fix the O-line on their own a little bit. Well, I think it was Brown too who stumbled and tripped in the backfield on a play that probably could have went for a first down, but just tripped. And then Paris Jones too. You've gotten some really good starts from him, and then like this past weekend, I think this past weekend then at Illinois just didn't play as well as he had in the other 4 games. So it's been kind of inconsistent. That's the story of the year to this point for the offense, trying to figure things out. Inconsistent. Sometimes you see the flash. Other times you see what it's really been, and that's not great. And I think it does have the potential, right? You got to think it does have the potential to get better, to provide UVA fans at least a little hope of optimism that it's gonna get better maybe later in the year when some of those old linemen are used to seeing some different defenses and it used to seeing some blitzes that maybe they hadn't seen before. These first 6 weeks of the season. Brennan, it seems like he's on the right trend. And I know you were sitting in the press box near me at Syracuse a couple of weeks ago, and there was a scout up there that had said, what Brennan looks like in this game against Syracuse won't be his evaluation of Brennan come week 11, week 12. And I think that's something that's important to think about is, that's a whole season worth of growth. And maybe that's what it takes. And I know that's tough to hear probably for fans who are typically impatient, but with a new coach, new system, learning it, maybe it just takes some time.
Yeah, I remember talking to that scout, and that was something that resonated with me was that they're looking at the bigger picture with Brennan and seeing his progress steadily like that would actually help his NFL draft stock because they're seeing him slowly improve. So that's the hope for Virginia. And the one thing that you notice on this offense, and this is the last thing we'll talk about, is you're seeing some of the younger guys pop up. You're seeing like Demick Starling, who came on against Louisville and he flashed a bit. And you're going to probably see more of that, as I feel like you're hearing Tony Elliott talk about guys, not stepping up and wanting to push the starters. And you're going to probably see those young guys, I think, moving forward if the starters aren't performing to the level that he's expected. And, I was just talking to somebody and you talk about the running backs and how they need to step up. How much do they miss Wayne Telapapa and his pass protection? When you look at when you're thinking of the O-line and the additional help there. So I think for me, it's trying to adjust expectations on certain positions, but also wait to see those young guys pop out. I think the young guys are the hope for this team. When you look at the talent that's coming up, you have Xavier Brown, who has flashed quite a bit, and you have Demick Starling, who has flashed. I think Virginia fans should have some hope in that regards too, because I think a lot of people are focusing on this season. And Tony Elliott wants to win this season, but from everything we've heard, Greg, it's about the long-term foundation this year. And that's what he's been kind of drawing upon. He's talking about trying to build a program, not win one game.
Yeah, I think that was his line last week ahead of the Louisville game is he's not going to sacrifice his long-term build for wins right now. That's a tough reality for fans to listen to, I'm sure. That's probably a tough reality if the players heard that, right? You're talking about you only get so many years of college football to play. You only get so many years of eligibility, especially if you're a senior or junior. And you've already had some weird seasons with the pandemic too.
Yeah.
That's probably tough to hear. But if Virginia wants to win big, maybe they ought to trust the new head coach who's seen it and been in it. Now, if it's still happening 3-4 years down the road and you're still talking about big picture stuff and culture, then you got a problem. But for right now, I think you got to give the new coach the time and the benefit of the doubt to figure it out and establish the way he wants to do things. It's his program, right? He's got the job. So that's kind of where it's at.
Yeah, and you can't really judge a coach until he's got his own players in there, players that fit his system. So I always say you got to let him have a couple of recruiting classes underneath his belt, because then he can say, this is finally my team. So we're going to actually take a quick break because we're going to talk about the defense, because that side of the ball has seen some success. So we'll be right back. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. Greg Madia from the Daily Progress is joining us on the show. And we talked a lot about the offense because that's been the hot topic. But we talked about fixing the offense and to get more production. But Greg, we were thinking that this was going to be a better defense coming into the season. We both said that we thought the defensive line was going to be a strength when it comes to depth. And you said that you were happy with the secondary, concerned a little bit of the depth. I thought I was going to be I was buying in on the secondary because I like some of that young depth. And going in, it seems like this was a nice turnaround by Coach Radzicki and his staff, turning around a liability for this team to a unit that has kept them in games, Greg.
Yeah, I know even this past weekend, though they gave up, 34 points to Louisville, they still created 2 turnovers. Really, the Duke game is the only throwaway game, I think, for the defense. Other than that, they've really kept Virginia, right? All those emphasis, all those teaching points on the fundamentals, the tackling reps. How many times in practice in the training camp sessions did we see the tackling circuit over and over and over again? And I think it really helped because you don't see as many missed tackles. Maybe a few this past Saturday, maybe a few the week before at Duke. But those first 4 weeks of the season, you didn't really see many missed tackles at all. The big plays, I think the past few weeks is probably a little bit of a concern and something Radzicki's going to want to take care of and eradicate going into this back half of the season, right? I think they gave up the 44-yard touchdown run to Brock Doman, the Louisville backup quarterback. He had a 32-yard touchdown pass to Marshawn Ford as well. And then the week before, they had a 59-yard run they gave up at Duke. Those you can't have those big plays when you're a bend but don't break defense. But in the first 4 games, you didn't have those. So that's what's interesting. I think only 1 touchdown of 20 or more yards in those first 4 games. So that's what you should be encouraged about is mostly you've gotten much improved results from last year. And I think going back to our conversation about buy-in, I think those defensive guys are bought in, right? I mean, they were looking for anything to hang on to because last year was so tough. And I think what Radzicki's done with his simple, easy to understand scheme is he's freed up those guys to play fast, and they're bought in, and they saw they could have a little bit of success. They forced 11 turnovers already, I think it is, which
and 13 sacks.
13 sacks. They've had contributions from all different players. Anthony Johnson, probably the best of the group, but Nick Jackson's been steady at middle linebacker. Cam Butler's provided some nice moments. Chico Bennett's had some moments. So I think to me, that's really the interesting. That's really the highlight of the season is the strides the defense has made. They just got to right the ship. We're coming out of the bye week to show the last 2 weeks were more out of the ordinary, fluky, out of the ordinary than what they normally are.
Yeah, and the last 2 games has also been out of the ordinary for the defense because against Duke, it was penalties that killed them. A lot of those points were coming from those personal fouls, and they were shooting themselves in the foot. Moving Duke was I think the second offensive drive was like 30 yards of just blatant penalties, moving him into the red zone. And then the game against Louisville, Aaron Famui was sat out for the first half because of his personal fouls. So you had one of your best defensive linemen sit on the bench for a lot of that time, which I know we were happy with the depth with the defensive line coming into the season, but Aaron Famui was doing well coming into the season. So you're missing one of your big pieces. So you can kind of explain some of the issues. But I agree with you. The big plays is what's concerning me right now. And a lot of it is in that middle of the field. And it's, if you listen to the podcast, when in one of my game recaps, I think it was against Syracuse, a lot of them is that middle of the field where they're figuring out a matchup where they can take advantage of. And a lot of times you're hard to pick a player out, but they've been attacking anytime James Jackson is in there in the middle. But that's also what you get for having a guy learning. That this is a young linebacker who's getting more reps. And that point was because Nick Jackson was out for a targeting call. And then Nick Jackson also was hurt against Louisville for a certain number of snaps. So he was in the medical tent. So you're still adjusting to a young linebacker group who hasn't had much reps. So that's the part of growing pains too. So you have to consider that when you're evaluating this team. But you brought Anthony Johnson. He is the highest graded defender on this Cavaliers team. He's having a really good season for them. He had a great game against Louisville. He was great in coverage. He had that pick. He also had 3 pass breakups, one of which led to an Antonio Clary interception, his first career pick. So, and if you look, we talked a lot about the D line because we were really impressed by this D line. They've had a few games where they've caused some havoc in the front, some pass rush, although they would love to have better numbers against Louisville, which they didn't have a sack or a tackle for a loss. But the secondary is what I've been impressed more because we knew this was a position group coming into the season that a lot of eyes were going to be on there. But Jonas Sanker, Lex Long, Antonio Clary, which is a second best tackler on the field for Virginia when he's playing. He's also one of the best at run defense. And we talked about this, Greg, when we we're at games, that he's been able to read the offenses a little bit better. And especially on those run plays, he's able to help the guys up front, the linebackers, set their positions for those. But those guys in that secondary, Ventrell Cypress, they've been really impressive. Even when Ventrell Cypress didn't play against Duke, Jalen Baker did well coming step in. So that depth at the secondary should be something that Virginia fans should be excited about.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, every time I watch Jonas Sanker, I'm so impressed with how he runs sideline to sideline. He's always around the ball. I feel like Clary a little bit of the same. And then with what you're getting at the corner spots, that helps slow opposing passing games, right? That really helps when you have corners that can shut down opposing wide receivers. I think Johnson was matched up with Louisville's best wide receiver for most of that game, Tyler Hudson, the transfer from Central Arkansas, and I thought Johnson did a really good job. And Cypress is younger, but gosh, he's been very good in coverage too. I think what I didn't anticipate with the D line was that Jack Camper wouldn't have as big of a role as he was supposed to have, right? I thought Camper would be more involved, but he's been banged up injury wise, so he hasn't played as much, and it's led to a little bit thinner of a D line. And then you to throw in Famuyi's benching this past weekend through the first half, that'll thin out that D line quick because you get pretty steady play from Butler and Bennett on the edges. Paul Akiri has played well in the some snaps he gets in games. Devontae Davis in the middle has been hit or miss. He doesn't play a whole lot. So to me, I think that's really with what you look at is you thought maybe Camper would have a bigger impact than he's had to this point. But the secondary, Virginia's got a lot to be happy about there, and even for the future, it looks pretty bright with that group, especially with Rudd and Jerome Cox leading the way. I think it helps when you have your defensive coordinator involved in the position room. That probably really helps align guys and understand what they're supposed to do within the defense. And I think that's playing a little bit of a role too.
Yeah, and I think also you have to consider that this staff, when they first got in and saw what their position was like in that defensive end spot, that outside bandit, they also figured they would have Mike Green in the mix too.
Yeah.
That's obviously not the case right now. So they're down one body as well. So that's why I probably think they're playing Paul Akir more now than they expected. Although Paul Akir honestly has had some good flashes. He's one that was able to shed the block a lot better against Duke, and he had some good flashes there.
Yeah.
So he is one, but I don't think they were probably thinking he's going to play more. I think when they factored in, I thought Mike Green was going to have a bigger role in this game. So that was, the defense has been a nice change of pace for Virginia. It's a night and day from last year. Obviously, we talked about the big plays. That's certainly the area of focus. So let's leave with one thing, Greg, before you go. I know you're in Charlotte preparing for basketball media days for women's on Tuesday and men's on Wednesday. So I don't want to keep you on too much longer. Moving forward, what is the biggest thing for Tony Elliott and his staff to get this second half going? Because this is a crunch time. You got to go to Atlanta, and then you have 3 big home games at home with Miami, UNC, and Pitt coming into town.
You got to start winning some games, right? That's how you get buy-in. That's how you get belief from the guys who are on the fence. I know that's probably the most obvious to any fan listening, but if you beat Georgia Tech, all of a sudden guys start saying, all right, 3-4. Maybe we can find a way to get to 6, or, we showed we can bounce back from a 3-game losing streak. That might be what guys are thinking. If you can get a win out of the gate against Georgia Tech and you got plenty of time to prep for the Yellow Jackets. So, if you can win a game or 2 right out of the chute coming off the bye week, maybe you reignite some hope, some energy, and you get those guys who, might be a little unsure, and see a result, see a positive result. I think that would help, right? UVA hasn't won a road game in a long, long time. Especially against Power Five opponents, sheesh, in a long time. They really they could use a win, right? That kind of cures everything and alleviates a lot of the stress for a little bit at least. So start winning some games.
Start winning some games. It sounds so easy, right?
Hey, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a results business, right? You gotta start winning some football games. I guess if you wanted a better answer, I guess offensively, you got to start
Scoring
eliminating.
points.
Well, that too, but eliminating turnovers, that'll give you a chance to score points. To
Yes.
me, that's the biggest issue, right? Going back to this past Saturday, I know Brennan Armstrong, he's doing everything he can to try to help the team. But if he doesn't fumble inside the red zone, there's a chance they go up 13-0 or 17-0, and Louisville quits with its backup quarterback, right? So,
Right.
it's those little things that, within a game, you're thinking, one turnover, no big deal. They're up 10-0. The wheels fell off after that. And that's a huge issue. So you've got to eliminate the margins. The margin for error is very small with this Virginia team. So
Yeah.
you can't give the ball away.
It really was a tale of two offenses where that fumble took the sails out of Virginia. And then the next drive, I believe, or one or two next drives, you had that long run by Louisville as quarterback. And that just sparked, he was gaining confidence every single drive he was there. He started and you were thinking, oh, this is going to be a long day for the Cardinals offense. And then he just kept getting better and better and better. It really was a tale of two different offenses, one losing confidence as the game went on, and one just embracing it and gaining confidence. So yeah, it's
I was going to say, when Virginia was in the red zone there, you thought, man, is this the day they put it all together and is this offense? And it looked like it. It really did up until that fumble. It looked like it. So you eliminate the turnovers and maybe you got a shot to score some more points.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the only thing I would add was that I agree with Tony Elliott in that press conference after the game is where people are still looking for Brennan Armstrong to be that guy to turn it around. If anything goes wrong, it's Brennan. Brennan's going to get us out of it. And I think that's forcing Brennan to do more than he should, as it is example with the fumble. When he's got that first down, just fall to the ground, throw the ball away at certain situations. Yeah. I think because people rely on it so much, and that's something, that's something that happened last year. They were always relying on Brennan Armstrong to get it done. You need someone else to step up in that offense. Keaton Thompson has done, the guy fights. He's the hard guy to come down, but you need more guys to put up and take a hold of this team on the offensive side. Not everything can go through five.
Yep. No, totally fair. Totally fair.
So, but Greg, thank you so much for joining us. I know that I've been getting on the message boards, they reminded me that I bought the O-line. So during the game preview, so I felt like we needed to talk about that. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Sometimes we're wrong, right? I mean, what are you going to do?
Sometimes we're not perfect.
All right. See you, Jackie.
Yeah. Thank you so much for Greg for joining us on the show. Like I said, I know we talked about accountability, and I felt like I needed to bring a Greg here to talk about what we said preseason. And of course, I'll bring Preston over too. He needs to pay for what his predictions were too. So I'll make sure to bring Preston on the show again so we can talk about those preseason predictions. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and like this show on YouTube, but also go ahead and subscribe to this show wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you can, leave a review and rate us. It'll help us with the algorithm and grow this show. I really appreciate all the support you have given. And we will be back here later this week. Since it's a bye week, it's a little bit different. My hope is instead of having a game recap this week, we had this midseason kind of review with Greg Madia. And then because we have basketball media days this week, and we also have the opportunity to watch the men and women scrimmage on Saturday, I will have a basketball podcast next Monday instead of a game recap. So we're going to have one more podcast on Thursday this week to discuss the football program, and we might dive into recruiting as well. And then next Monday, we'll have a basketball focused podcast to discuss our big big perspective from the scrimmages, what we liked, what we didn't like, and what are the expectations for that program as well as that season is set to tip off. So for Greg Madia, I'm Jacquie Franciulli, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your week.